In just hours from now, attorneys in the murder trial for Jennifer Mee, also known as the Hiccup Girl, will be making their opening statements. The jury was just chosen Tuesday evening.
True crime stories remind us of how a single decision can unravel lives, leaving devastation in its wake. Few cases encapsulate this better than the story of Jennifer Mee. Once a national sensation known as the Hiccup Girl, Jennifer's life took a dark turn that ended in tragedy. She went from being a quirky teen battling an unusual condition to a convicted murderer. This is the real-life story of the night she realized her actions caused the deaths of two people, and the chain of events that led to that chilling moment. Jennifer Mee, the Hiccup Girl that America loved. In 2007, Jennifer Mee, a 15-year-old high school student from St. Petersburg, Florida, became a media darling overnight. She was dubbed the Hiccup Girl after developing an uncontrollable case of hiccups that persisted for weeks. Her condition was mysterious, with doctors and specialists unable to pinpoint the cause. Jennifer would hiccup as often as 50 times a minute. Television shows quickly picked up on her strange story. She appeared on programs like The Today Show and Inside Edition, capturing the hearts of viewers nationwide. People sympathized with Jennifer as she struggled to lead a normal life despite her bizarre medical condition. But what seemed like an innocent story of a teen with bad luck masked deeper issues in her life. After several months, Jennifer's hiccups stopped as mysteriously as they had begun. Yet her moment in the spotlight was fleeting. Once the media attention faded, Jennifer returned to a life of relative obscurity. But those brief moments of fame left her yearning for attention, a desire that would ultimately lead her down a dark path. A life spiraling out of control. Jennifer's post-hiccup years were tumultuous. Her family lived in poverty, and she struggled with depression, instability, and feelings of rejection as the fame she once enjoyed vanished. Friends from that time described her as a girl trying to find her place in the world, but lacking the guidance she needed. She started spending time with the wrong crowd, experimenting with drugs and hanging out with people who thrived on a lifestyle of petty crime. She became a shadow of the bubbly teenager the world had once seen on TV. By the time she turned 19, Jennifer was deeply entangled in a dangerous environment of theft, manipulation, and desperation. It was in this context that Jennifer met Lemont Newton and LaRon Rayford. Together, the trio would commit the crime that sealed all their fates forever: the deadly plan. On October 23, 2010, Jennifer Mee orchestrated a robbery that turned deadly. She connected with 22-year-old Shannon Griffin through a social media platform. Shannon was a former Walmart employee and a kind-hearted young man looking for companionship. Jennifer and Shannon exchanged messages, and she invited him to meet her at a house in St. Petersburg. What Shannon didn't know was that Jennifer had no intention of meeting him for an innocent get-together. She had lured him into a trap. Jennifer's accomplices, Newton and Rayford, were waiting nearby with a plan to rob Shannon at gunpoint. When Shannon arrived at the meeting spot, things quickly spiraled out of control. As Newton and Rayford attempted to rob him, Shannon fought back, refusing to hand over his belongings. A scuffle broke out, and the situation escalated beyond what anyone had anticipated. In the chaos, Shannon was shot 4 times. His lifeless body was left on the ground, and the three fled the scene with nothing to show for their crime. What began as a plan to rob a man had turned into a cold-blooded murder. The arrest and the evidence. Police worked quickly to piece together the events of that night. It didn't take long for them to identify Jennifer, Newton, and Rayford as suspects. The evidence against Jennifer was overwhelming. Phone records and social media messages showed that she had been the one to lure Shannon to the location under false pretenses. Jennifer was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Despite not pulling the trigger herself, she faced the same charge as the shooter under Florida's felony murder law. This law holds all participants in a crime equally responsible for any deaths that occur during the commission of the crime. Jennifer's arrest shocked those who remembered her as the innocent Hiccup Girl from a few years earlier. The quirky teenager who had once been a media darling was now facing the possibility of life in prison for her role in a brutal murder. The trial, a moment of reckoning. Jennifer's trial in 2013 captivated public attention. Prosecutors painted her as the mastermind behind the crime, arguing that she had used her charm and social media skills to lure Shannon into a deadly trap. The text messages between Jennifer and her accomplices were damning, clearly showing that she had coordinated the robbery. Jennifer's defense team argued that she had been manipulated by Newton and Rayford, claiming that she was a vulnerable young woman who didn't fully understand the consequences of her actions. They portrayed her as a victim of circumstance rather than a calculating criminal. But the jury wasn't convinced. The evidence showed that Jennifer had willingly participated in the planning and execution of the robbery, knowing it carried a risk of violence. On September 18, 2013, Jennifer was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The moment she realized the consequences. For Jennifer, the weight of her actions seemed to hit her all at once during the sentencing. Throughout the trial, she had maintained a calm, detached demeanor, often appearing stoic or emotionless. But when the verdict was announced, her composure crumbled. Witnesses in the courtroom described the look of despair on her face as she realized she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her dreams, her freedom, and her future were gone in an instant. More chillingly, she had to come to terms with the fact that her actions had directly caused the deaths of two people, Shannon Griffin, who lost his life that night, and herself, as she would now be confined to a prison cell for the rest of her days. The victims left behind. The true victims of this tragedy were Shannon Griffin and his family. Shannon's mother, Patricia, spoke openly about the pain of losing her son in such a senseless act of violence. She described him as a hardworking, kind individual who would have given the world to those he cared about. For Patricia and the rest of Shannon's family, no sentence could ever bring him back. They were left to grapple with the loss of a son and brother, knowing he died in such a brutal and unnecessary way. Jennifer's family also suffered greatly in the aftermath of her conviction. Her mother, Rachel Robidoux, stood by her daughter throughout the trial, hoping for a lesser sentence. But the life sentence without parole was a crushing blow, leaving Rachel to mourn the loss of her daughter to a lifetime of incarceration. Lessons learned from a tragic case. The case of Jennifer Mee serves as a sobering reminder of the far-reaching consequences of crime. A young woman who once had her whole life ahead of her was now behind bars, and a kind-hearted man lost his life for nothing. The ripple effects of this tragedy extended to the families of both the victim and the perpetrator, leaving devastation in their wake. This case also reignited debates about the felony murder rule, which holds all participants in a crime equally responsible for any resulting deaths. While some argue that the rule is overly harsh in cases like Jennifer's, others see it as a necessary deterrent against violent crimes. The story of Jennifer Mee is a haunting example of how one decision can destroy countless lives. From a quirky teenager battling hiccups to a convicted murderer serving life in prison, Jennifer's fall from grace was both shocking and tragic. But the greatest tragedy of all was the loss of Shannon Griffin, a young man who became the victim of a senseless and brutal crime. As we reflect on this case, it's a chilling reminder of how crime destroys not just the victims, but everyone involved, including the perpetrators and their families. If this story moved you and you'd like to see more true crime cases, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Dark Diaries. Your support allows us to bring you more stories that uncover the darkest corners of humanity. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.